اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. My dear respected scholars, Assalamu alaikum Hajj. Haidar, Salaam alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, let me beautiful anecdote, hadith. Some Sadiq alayhi salam, and he says to him, we have a maid who works for us. And this maid, every maybe break something or misplace something or whatever. And when she does, she quits to by saying, إذا ذكرتموه بكيتم إني لم أفعل. She would say, I swear in the name. Now remember, those maids back in those days, for the most part, they weren't Muslim. But what she had done was that she recognized there was something that the entire family revolved around, something that identified the family, something that was sacred to them and holy. And so she would use that to redeem herself or to exonerate herself. And the statement was this: I swear in the name of the one whom you cry for whenever you mention his name. In other words, I swear in the name of Imam al-Hussain, I didn't do this. Or I ask you to forgive me. Now this man is telling Imam al-Sadiq about his maid who makes that statement. The Imam said to him, Rahimakumullah min ahli bayt. May Allah bless such a household. A household where the name of Imam al-Hussain is omnipresent, where the remembrance of Imam al-Hussain is taken so seriously. Whenever his name is mentioned, people burst into tears. And even the maid recognizes how dear the name of Imam al-Hussain is to this family, hence her appeal to Abu Abdullah al-Hussain. Our aim should be to try and build a family that looks like this, where the end result is Imam al-Sadiq praying and invoking God's mercy upon such a household, inshallah.
I think part of what you all said, if I just play devil's advocate for a second, is quite a utopian view, if I'm honest. Sayyid Mahdi mentioned, being the family that Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam praises, which is, of course, is everyone's end goal. Sayyid Ali mentioned, pushing the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt and the Quran and Akhlaq. Shaykhna, you mentioned, not just relying on the member and the madrasa. I think the reality for a lot of parents in the West is that with the rat race of life, you end up spending a lot of time trying to keep up. And then at the same time, you have to rely on the member and the madrasa. A lot of the time, they're spending more time outside of the member and the madrasa, where, for example, Sayyid Ali mentioned LGBTQ is not a big deal in Najaf. In the UK, it's a massive deal, right? So I think that there are situations where it's going to be, a lot of the time as a parent, some people feel like they're having to battle against the current and the wave of everything else that's going against them. So when you mention it's like giving up, a lot of people now are thinking, I'm sure there's people in this room that are thinking, should I just leave the UK? If I'm in a place where the end goal of all three of you mentioned that should be to have a Hussaini family. Now, if it's easier to raise a Hussaini family outside of the UK because there's less forces against you, should we not all just be thinking about leaving a place that's pushing us against having a Hussaini family? Who wants to answer? We can share this mic now, by the way.
Every time you ask a question. Okay, so there were a whole lot of questions there, and you're a great advocate for the devil, by the way, I have to say. So the question as to whether or not we should leave the UK or whichever country you happen to be in, exactly, is not the right question, because it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to face a very similar set of challenges. Yes, life in Najaf is very different from life in London. Life in Qom is different from life in Sydney. But the same sorts of challenges that we've been talking about, the same agenda is being pushed everywhere through global institutions. I mean, these are not bound by any country borders. These are being pushed through the UN. They're being pushed by Blackstone and other, massive hedge fund organizations that control hundreds of billions, over $1 trillion, in fact. And so you can't really escape this. And what I would say is, if you've got a plan, the problem is we don't have a plan. There is no roadmap. There is no clear conception of what it takes to raise a Hussaini family or Hussaini children. If there was a plan, we wouldn't be in such a desperate situation as we are right now. Let me give you an example. There was a woman who was packing her son's bag because he was moving from one of the Muslim countries to the US to, study at university. And so her neighbor came to her and she said to her, "You must be so worried about your son right now. I mean, he's going to America all alone." And she's like, "No, I'm not worried." She said, "But surely you're anxious about what's going to happen to him. He's going to be in a non-Muslim environment. He's just by himself." She's like, "No, I'm not anxious at all." And she's like, "But surely you're upset that he's not going to be with you and the rest of the family." And she's like, "No." She said, "How could you not be upset? How could you not be concerned or anxious about what's going to happen to him religiously and morally?" She's like, "Because I know how I raised him. I raised him in a manner where, sure, you're always going to be concerned. As a mother, as a father, you're going to have certain anxieties, and those are good anxieties to have. But I know what I've done. I've fulfilled my role as a mother to such an extent where I don't need to now be in a frantic, desperate search for an alternative." The minute we say, should we move out of the UK, it means that there was a lack of plan, a lack of roadmap. And so we're just being hysterical right now. We're being frantic about this. We're not making decisions rationally, right? We're reacting, exactly. Which is why Amir al-Mu'mineen says, بادروا أحداثكم قبل أن تسبقكم إليه المرجئة. Mubadara is to take initiative. Mubadara is to try and address the potential challenges that will be presented to my son or my daughter when they go to school at the age of 5, when they're only 2 years old. Mubadara is to ensure that they're protected and that it's a preemptive strike, right? It is us giving them the values, teaching them and inculcating the love of the Ahlul Bayt. The Samahat al-Sayyid, may Allah bless him, referred to the hadith. The Prophet says, start by teaching them to love the Ahlul Bayt. Now, how could you teach someone to love something? Well, you introduce them to them. You introduce the Ahlul Bayt to the children so that they take them as heroes. There's a ziyarah of Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam, which literally says that, "As-salamu alayka ya batal al-Islam." You're the hero of this religion. There are no greater heroes than the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Introduce them to their legends. And I've always said the problem is with the parents. وَيْلٌ لِأَبْنَاءِ آخِرِ الزَّمَانِ مِنْ آبَائِهِمْ, as the Prophet says. The problem is with the parents. When they don't have the knowledge, when they don't read and study and learn about the lives of the Ahlul Bayt, who were sent as role models and guides, if we don't know enough about them, then how can we impart that knowledge to our children?
Can we improve that reference, the narrative? And I understand some of they say it's come from different territories, but we need a narrative that we have to work together to. Is that possible? And focus more on the rational thinking and more on real real knowledge.
Okay, so
stuff from
I'm
the
going to
Imams.
pick out a question from that Sayyid Mehdi, just to basically, what can we do to strengthen our identity, basically?
There's no question that the strongest identity, the strongest link and bond that we have to morality is what the Prophet left us with when he said, إِنِّي تَارِكٌ فِيكُمُ الثَّقَلَيْنِ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَعِتْرَتِي ما إن تمسكتم بهما لن تضلوا بعدي أبدا وقد نبأني اللطيف الخبير أنهما لن يفترقا حتى يردا علي الحوض. The Holy Prophet laid out the road to salvation in no ambiguous terms. He couldn't be clearer. And not only that, but just the other day, somebody came up to me after the majlis and he said that I brought my friend tonight, who is a Sunni, and he came to the majlis. And I said to him, God bless you, brother. It's great to have you here. Because after all, Imam al-Hussein isn't about Shia versus Sunni. Imam al-Hussein is the Prophet's grandson. As a matter of fact, the Prophet said, Husaynun minni wa ana min Hussein. And obviously it's easy to explain how Imam al-Hussein could be min Rasulullah because he's his grandson. But when the Prophet says, wa ana min Hussein, how do you explain that? It means that our conduit to Rasulullah and therefore our conduit to Allah is Imam al-Hussein. And so then I mentioned Hadith al-Thaqalain to him and I said, after all, when the Prophet says that this is your path to salvation, this is your only means of surviving in these tumultuous, dark, turbulent times where morality is completely upended and, up is down and left is right and hot is cold and whatnot, is through the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. If we're going to find an identity that unites us all and connects us to all of the virtues, all of the moral teachings of every single prophet of God. Assalamu alayka ya waritha Adam safwatillah. Assalamu alayka ya waritha Nuh al-Nabiyillah. Assalamu alayka ya waritha Ibrahim, Musa, Isa. It is through Imam al-Hussein. But I do disagree that we need to tone down the emotions. I think the emotional element of Imam al-Hussein's saga is part and parcel. It's the bedrock of the remembrance of the Ahlul Bayt and Imam al-Hussein in particular. أنا شهيد العبر ما ذكرني مؤمن إلا بكى. In fact, it's the emotional connection that most people are able to utilize to reach Imam al-Hussein on a rational level. It's the emotional connection that makes them come to the majalis and try and embody the teachings of Imam al-Hussein as best as they could in their lives. We definitely need more of that. But at the same time, if that helps us to analyze the life of the Imam and his teachings in a rational way, then so be it. That's also necessary.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum assalam.
Sorry, this question goes back to RSC again. We know obviously the risks of RSC, we know the dangers, and we know practically removing children and taking them to Islamic schools isn't always an option. And we know also RSC isn't just a subject. It sort of has bled through the whole curriculum, whether it's English, science, TV, cartoons, movies, it's everywhere.
Yep.
So practically, maybe it'd be great to have each of the scholars actually give us just practically what would you say to a child when they question these things. We know the theory, but maybe practically, what do you say in response to their queries?
In response to what? Sorry, what type? What we're making reference to here? What type of query?
Relationships. When they see this being discussed at school, when they hear these things. Yeah. So practically, how do you answer these questions?
So, for example, a child approaching you and then querying whether or not a legitimate relationship is okay or not, basically.
Yeah, and what's wrong with it? Because this will be. Yeah, this is okay. Yeah.
Can we do this in like one tip each? Can we do that? I'm going to trust you with the mic, all of you. So one tip each, inshallah. And then, هو الشيخ بس ما بقى سيد.
Nice save. So I think that's a very simplistic approach because it's not just one issue, it's not just one query as you alluded to. And so what needs to happen really, one of the foundational methods of addressing these problems, whether it be these, the specific rainbow acronym or any other immoral matter relating to immorality, is that our children need to be taught the importance of halal and haram, right? Sometimes you see kids, and I've seen this in my own family and my relatives, they go to the supermarket and they've literally memorized every single brand of chips or crisps, as you call them, which is halal or haram. And they go halal, 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 haram, haram, halal, haram, halal, halal. Why? Because they've been trained to take this matter very seriously. That if it's haram, I'm not even going to take another look, let alone buy or eat it. And so if the child has been raised from the very beginning to take halal and haram seriously, then this conversation is not going to be a difficult one. Haram, end of discussion. And they'll be satisfied with that. I'm not saying that you should try and force them into acquiescence. They'll be satisfied with the fact that God is displeased with this. That's number one. Number two, one really useful technique, and again, this requires early training from the very beginning, is what's called associationism. It's the idea that when you make, in a nutshell, tawalli and tabarri. When a child takes tawalli seriously and tabarri seriously, when they begin to dislike and abhor individuals that are seen as enemies of God, you can then associate any immoral act to them and they'll automatically hate them. They'll automatically begin to despise the act, not because of the act itself, because their brains aren't mature enough to fully digest what the act is. Like relationships, exactly, Ahsant. Let's not go there. But basically, the idea is that while their brains aren't developed enough to understand the abhorrent, grotesque nature of a particular wrong act, right? Why is alcohol haram? For a child, because they don't drink, because they don't understand what it is, they won't understand why it's haram. But if you tell them that Yazid used to drink, all of a sudden, they can relate to that. And they'll develop a natural, instinctive, negative response towards this act. Which is why the hadiths use this methodology. The Imam says that Yazid used to do, 1, 2, 3. Without going into detail, but the point is, create a very strong affinity towards the Ahlul Bayt and associate every good moral act with them. A very strong apprehension against the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt, attribute all of these things to them, and in many cases they're actually true.